Welcome back, guys, to day 2 of our Impossible Building project. In this project, we're constructing otherworldly, dreamlike buildings by assembling pieces from lots of different images and blending them smoothly together using your clone stamp tool, using layer masks, and using selection tools like the lasso and the magic wand. I'm going to show you today how I finished off my design by adding some extra little details and doing some color adjustments to make this really stand out. So here's the original image that I started with, and you can see where I stretch out the sky to fill in the background. I'm just going to turn on some of my layers here so that you can see how this was put together. One of the first things I added was a little chimney with this vulture on it from one of the additional photos. And then I started to use my clone stamp tool to cover up doors and windows and make this just a totally sealed in building. On top of that, I added some power lines. These were images that I downloaded from Google, and I just used the magic wand to select out the sky and leave only the poles behind. Now, all of these also have layer masks on them, as you can see, so that I could reveal parts of the power lines where I needed to and hide it in other places. So I added 1, 2, and I think 3 sets of lines to make all these kind of mysterious cables coming into the building. I also added some other architectural details from the other houses, like these parapets here, and this big part to go on top. And that was pretty much the point where I was ready to kind of stop at that point. Now you're going to be adding up to 8 more images onto your image. So you'll have a lot of pieces coming together in this final design. But one of the things that happens is that you can kind of create a fake look to it because the colors and the lighting are very different for each of the photos that we picked from. So there are some ways that we can adjust that to create color effects. Okay. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my layers here by holding down Shift and selecting all the layers that make up my design. And I'm going to right click and duplicate these layers. Okay. And what that does is it's going to automatically create copies of every single layer. Okay. So watch what happens to my layers palette over here when I hit this. Boom. I get copies of everything. Okay. Now I'm going to take all these copies and we're going to squash them down into one layer so that'll be easier to edit. Okay. And the reason I made copies is so I don't mess up my originals. If this doesn't look right, I don't have to start all over again. I can just go back to the original layers. Okay. So I'm going to right click those and I'm going to go to merge layers. Okay. Now watch, all those layers are going to get squashed down to one. And I'm just going to name this so that I know the difference here. This is merge layers. Okay. All right. So now on this merge layer, I'm going to do some color editing and make this thing look really cool and different. So I'll go up to my filters menu. Now, one of the filters that we have in here is called the Camera Raw filter. Okay. And this is in Photoshop. We will work a different way for Photopea, but in Photoshop, we're going to do Camera Raw. And it will launch this editor that lets you adjust colors and looks for your image. Okay. So this is what will pop up on your screen. Let me pull it over here. Maybe. Oh no, it's not going to let me bring it over. Okay, I'm going to bring this over. It opens up in a new window, and it's basically like a bunch of Photoshop tools all in one place. Okay, on the right-hand side, you have in order all the different things you can do to adjust your image. So we want to start from the top and work our way down. I'm going to start with the basic settings. And in here, I can adjust things like exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows. So watch what each of these does. The exposure, if I turn it to the right, the whole image gets brighter. If I turn it to the left, I can darken it up. Contrast is going to make the black and white parts of the image stronger. So as I turn this up, the blacks get blacker, the whites get whiter until you create kind of a moody, high contrast look. If you go the opposite way, everything's going to get very gray and flat. Okay? I like to add a little bit of contrast to my images. We can adjust just the brightest part of your image using the highlights. And we can also adjust the shadows using the shadow slider to brighten or darken those as you need to. Okay. Now these next 3 right here add detail to the image. So when I turn up the texture slider, watch what happens. All of the textures get a lot stronger. I can see more cracks in the wood and more broken shingles and cracks in the wall. So that really adds a lot of detail to your image. The same thing with clarity. As we turn this up, you're going to see some of those details start to really stand out. Makes it look grittier and grimier. Okay. Down here in the vibrance and saturation is where we can adjust colors. So if you want your colors really bright and popping, you can turn the saturation slider up until you see those bright blues and bright greens. If you want it to look more faded and old, we can actually take color out of the image and make everything kind of grayish where all the colors are fading to gray. So I'm going to take a little bit of color out of mine here just like that. Okay. So those are your basic settings down below. Okay. Now, you also have this one. If we scroll down, we're not going to get into these today because these are a little bit more advanced. But if you go down to the effects tab, you can do what's called vignetting. And this is like a filter you've probably seen in Instagram where you can add dark shadows to the corners. So I'm going to go to vignetting. And as I turn this down, you can see that the corners of my photo get darker, almost like there's a spotlight on the house in the middle of the image. Can add kind of a spooky effect to it. Okay. You can also add grain if you want your image to look a little bit more grimy and old. You can add grain in, and as you zoom in here, you'll see that now it's got a little bit of fuzziness to it, like an old found photo. Okay. All right. Finally, we're going to go over on this right hand panel here, and there's a tab for presets. And presets, you can think of like your Instagram filters. These are built-in color adjustments like you would add to a photo in Instagram that will automatically style your image. So all you have to do to use these is open up one of the tabs and then mouse over it. So watch what I'm going to do here. I'll go to the vintage style, okay? And there's 10 different styles here. And as I put my mouse over each one, you can see how it's going to change the look of the photo and give me kind of an old vintage Polaroid look to it. Okay, very similar to some Instagram filters you've probably seen. There's a category for cinematic, which will make these look more like scenes from a movie. So some of these darken the colors or make them brown and old. Others will really brighten the colors and make it stand out. Okay. If you want to go pure black and white, you can go to the black and white setting and just mouse over each of these different black and whites until you find one that looks really good. Okay. And try all of these. There's so many different ones that you can pick from. Landscapes often boost colors in really interesting ways. If you come down to the color in the creative section, you can go from like high contrast or vivid colors. Or if you go to the creative one here, there's some really neat ones like cool light, turquoise and red, mist, and each of these will have a different look. Okay. So I think I want to do mine in a black and white style. So I'm going to go up to this black and white category and find a good black and white setting. I really like how that looks. That's black and white 5. And so I'm just going to click on it and that will add that effect to my image. Okay. So we'll just click that and it's all set. Let me go back. I'm going to add a little bit more vignette. I think I want my corners a little bit darker like that. Sweet. Okay. And then when you're all done, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button that says OK. And when you press that, it applies the filters to that merge layer. And now you have your final image that you can save as a JPEG to turn into me. Okay. Keep in mind that this isn't the only way you could edit this. Remember, I did this on a merge layer. So if I hide this, there's all my original layers back here. I can still go in and move pieces around and add more pieces until I create an even different design. And I can keep different versions just by hiding those layers. In fact, I did a color version of this one. I'll turn that on for you, where I actually added in some flocks of birds and I added like a sunset sky to make this kind of moody and dark. So 2 different versions of the same project. I can make as many possibilities as I want. So have fun with this, guys. Remember, when you're done, you want to save all of your layers. So you're going to go up to File, Save As, and you're going to make sure that you're saving it as a Photoshop PSD file. Okay. You always want to put that into your desktop folder so that you have it if you want to come back and work on it later. If you just want to save the versions that you made, like this black and white version, I'm going to go to File, export, export as. And this is just going to create let me move my picture out of the way. This is just going to create a JPEG copy of my image. So it doesn't do anything to my original. It just saves a copy with this particular style on it. So I'll hit export, and then I'll go ahead and save that to my folder as well. Okay. Have fun with it, guys. Get creative and really see what you can do with colors at the end of this project.